It was an event witnessed by thousands of people, yet the results of that event were kept hidden by the Vatican for over 80 years. Then, in June of 2000, Pope John Paul II suddenly, and without warning, released what had been the Vatican's most closely guarded secret. Could it be that these few lines, scribbled on a piece of paper almost a century ago, have changed all of our lives irrevocably? Since 1981, in bloody and war-torn Bosnia, a group of children, now grown to young men and women, claim to have seen an apparition of the Virgin Mary near a cement cross on a rocky hillside, and thousands of pilgrims ignore the bloodshed and strife to make their way to what was once Yugoslavia in order to see this amazing phenomenon for themselves. But you are more likely to have heard about a similar apparition in Fátima, Portugal in 1917 than about the appearance in Medjugorje. Why? What is there about the Fatima experience that is so unique? These three children, Jacinto, age 8, and her brother Francisco, age 9, and a cousin, Lúcia, the eldest of the three at age 10, all claimed to see what they called the Blessed Mother standing above a small oak tree in a field where they tended sheep. If that's all there was to it, the entire thing would most likely have been forgotten long ago. But there was more, much more. Because she was the oldest, Lúcia was expected to look after her two younger cousins, and she took her responsibilities very seriously. That's why on May 13th, 1917, a bright, sunny Sabbath day, when she saw a brilliant flash of light in the sky, Lúcia instructed them to immediately start the sheep for home. It could be the warning of an impending storm. But that flash of light was about to bring something into their lives far more exciting than a mere thunderstorm. Another flash of light drew their attention to the top of a small oak tree that stood near the gate of the pasture. There, above the tree, her feet not quite touching the branches, stood the image of a beautiful young woman, all dressed in white. A white mantle covered her head, and a brilliant aura surrounded her and enveloped the children as well. Her white dress was tied at the neck with a golden ribbon. A white hooded cloak bordered with gold covered her head and framed her whole body. A necklace of gold hung nearly to her waist, and her hands were folded in front of her, as if in prayer. How do we know all this? Lúcia told her mother, "We were so close that we were inside the circle of light that radiated from her." But even that kind of clarity wouldn't have been enough to create the worldwide fame and rapt devotion this apparition has achieved. What was so singularly different about this vision?
In fact, there were an amazing number of witnesses to this event over the 6 months period of time that it happened, literally tens of thousands of people. But the most interesting thing of all that to me is that there were prophecies and promises that were made by the lady to the children that have come true with some astonishing accuracy. In fact, these prophecies are having a very profound effect on our world today.
The appearance of the apparition at Fatima was apparently not a one-day event, nor was it limited to just the children. It was, however, selective on other levels. Only the children could hear the apparition, and of the children, only Lúcia could speak with her. But we're getting ahead of our story. The apparition first assured the children they did not have to be afraid, and told them she was from heaven. She then gave them some astonishing instructions. They were to return to the same place on the 13th day of the month, every month, for the next 6 months. Then she said she would tell them who she was and what she wanted. She also asked the children if they were prepared to offer themselves to God and to accept all the suffering He would send to them to make up for the sins of the world. Lúcia responded for all the children with a forceful yes. The children would soon have an opportunity to remember that decision with all its frightful implications. But the record shows no hint that any of them ever regretted or reneged on their promise to the lady.
Lúcia was a profoundly religious child, and she had no way of knowing what was going on around her because she was just trying to be a kid and live. And that what was going on in 1917 that she was in the midst of would turn out to be one of history's most profound eras.
The political climate in Portugal in 1917 was extremely hostile. It was against the Catholic Church because the people who took over power were Masons, were humanists, who did not like the dominance of the Church in the Portuguese society. So they tried to suppress what happens in Fatima because, of course, they realized that it has the potential and power to re-strengthen the Catholic Church.
The children decided it would be best if they didn't tell anyone about their experience. But by the time they reached home, their vow of silence had been completely forgotten. Jacinta immediately told her mother everything that had happened, with Francisco eagerly agreeing. Children are not often listened to, even today. And given the historical context of the time, the reaction is perhaps quite understandable. Lucia's mother tried every way she could think of to make her confess that she had made up the story. Lucia, in tears, begged her mother to stop the accusations. Instead, she dragged her off to the village priest. They threatened to shut her up for the rest of her life if she didn't confess she had been telling lies. But all their efforts were in vain. Lucia, Jacinta, and Francisco had made a promise to the lady and to God, and not even threats from parents, the church, or eventually even the government would deter them. The story spread through the whole region, and on June 13th, over 50 people had gathered near the oak tree starting early in the morning. The children arrived about 11 o'clock. Their parents refused to come with them, afraid of being embarrassed if the whole thing turned out to be a fraud. But neither the children nor the visitors would be disappointed. Precisely at noon, the lady was there. Again, according to witnesses, it was Lucia who did all the talking. Frustrated and unhappy, Lucia asked if she would please take them with her to heaven. The answer was the first of several prophetic and therefore verifiable statements. The apparition told Lucia she would take Jacinta and Francisco to heaven soon, but Lucia would be required to stay a while longer. Lucia was devastated, but she accepted the lady's answer without question. Again, there was a dull explosion. Witnesses reported seeing only a little cloud above the tree rise up slowly and move off toward the east. The vision had survived its first test, and news of the mysterious phenomenon spread like wildfire.
By July 13th, hundreds of villagers and travelers were coming to see the miracle in the meadow. But the chief administrator of the province, Lúcia Santos, saw this as a direct challenge to the goals of the political regime. So the last thing that he needed was some miracle.
The July 13th appearance was particularly notable. On this visit, the lady showed all three children a terrible vision. Lucia was told to write what she had seen in a letter. She was free to talk about the first two parts of the vision, but the last part was to be kept secret until 1960, 43 years into the future. The first of the three prophecies was that World War I would end soon, but another and more terrible war would begin in the reign of the next pope. The second dealt specifically with Russia, saying that nation would spread terrors throughout the world, but if Russia were to be consecrated to the worship of the Mother of God, then Russia would eventually cease to be a threat to other nations. But what of the third prophecy?
On the 10th of August, the summons was delivered to the parents of the three children. They had to appear the next morning at 11 o'clock at the town hall in Urem. The rumor about the secret given to the children has reached Santos, and he tried everything to find out what it was about. But none of the children, and especially not Lucia, was willing to reveal it to him. On the 13th of August, Fatima was flooded by over 15,000 visitors, and Lucia had a hard time to fight her way through the masses, and when she eventually reached the home of her cousins, she found Santos being with them already and interrogating them.
The administrator had kidnapped the children on the day that the lady was scheduled to appear, and word of this spread throughout the town, and the mood was pretty ugly. In fact, the townspeople were prepared to storm the jail where the administrator was keeping the children. But at about noontime, when the sighting was scheduled to happen, A sudden clap of thunder brought everything to a halt. Thousands of people looked around to see what had made that sound and noticed a white cloud that moved over and came to rest right above the oak tree, and after it was there just for a couple of moments, rose up, flew away, disappeared. Meanwhile, back at the jail, Santos is trying to get the children to recant their story. He's using bribes, he's using threats, nothing has worked. So, amazingly, he threatens to boil them in oil.
For 2 more days, Santos threatened the children without success. They stood by every tiny nuance of their story, including their promise not to tell anyone about the third prophecy. Finally, on the 15th, he released them. Nothing, not even the threat of being boiled in oil, could shake their faith in the vision of the lady. But what did it all mean? Surely a 10-year-old child in Fatima, Portugal, could not know of the terrible and bloody coup Lenin had in mind for the Tsar of Russia, or the horrible massacres that would come in his wake. And not even the most practiced politicians would have predicted a quick end to World War I, let alone another, even bloodier war. Was there a condition in the prophecy that would end Russian terror? If so, has that condition been met? And what was the secret of the third prophecy? Lucia obediently wrote it down, but it would not be revealed in 1960. It would not be revealed until the year 2000. What did it say? The third part of the Fatima prophecy was carefully written down by the young Lucia and delivered to the Pope in a sealed envelope. Some reports say it was read before the College of Cardinals. Others claim only the popes have seen it. One report, never denied, said that when Pope Pius XII read the letter, he fainted. What message could a child of 10 have written that would have such a profound impact on a pope? Was it a warning of the last great war, or a timetable counting down to the end of the world? World War I did, of course, end very soon, and World War II arrived right on schedule, just as predicted. The first part of the prophecy was fulfilled to the letter. But the vision about Russia is a bit more problematic. Could it be that the war against communism was not won on the stage of world politics, but rather in a remote village in the mountains of Portugal?
By the evening of September 12th, there were endless streams of people had made their way to Fatima. 30,000 people, most of them deep in prayer. All the troubles of the world had been brought to this one place by these people, hoping that Our Lady would grant their request to heal the sick and to return their husband from war, and that all would be made right for them.
On October 13th, the day the great miracle was to be performed, it was almost impossible to find space enough to kneel and pray anywhere near the pasture. To make matters worse, the cold autumn winds had begun to blow, and a continuous drizzle of rain had begun the night before that soaked through coats, hats, and shoes. The children had great difficulty getting through to the small oak tree, but at last everything was as it should be. Lucia called out to the crowd that the lady was coming, and the huge crowd fell silent. Once again, the apparition spoke only to Lucia, telling her she wanted a chapel built on that very spot. What happened next is still a cause of great controversy. According to witnesses, and there were thousands of them, a slender column of bluish smoke appeared about 6 feet above the heads of the children and rose to a height of about 6 feet above that. Suddenly, the sun, which had been hiding behind the clouds, broke through and shone brightly. Witnesses claimed they could look directly at the sun, clearly defined and radiant, without it hurting their eyes. But the sun didn't remain in place. Instead, it started rotating at a mad speed as if detached from the sky and came rushing toward Earth. Everything took on the color of amethyst. Some witnesses reported the event as the sun becoming as a white ball and falling toward Earth in a zigzag manner, while all around them buildings and people changed from red to blue to yellow hues of color. And there was one other still unexplained phenomenon. The people suddenly became aware that their clothes, which had been dripping wet just moments before, were now perfectly dry.
The lady had fulfilled her promise to the 3 children. A miracle had been performed for everyone to see. Jacinta and Francisco died of tuberculosis while children, just as the lady had said, which left only Lucia to bear the burden of the apparition prophecies.
Then there was the matter of the Pope consecrating Russia to the worship of the Mother of God in order to end the terror and bloodshed that nation would bring to the earth. But over the years, no amount of pleading by a simple peasant girl, now a Carmelite nun, could persuade any of the popes to go quite that far. Then there was that enigmatic third prophecy. When it was not revealed in 1960, as Lucia had been instructed, some people became fixated on knowing what was in it, but the popes were immovable. Then on May 13, 1981, the 64th anniversary of the beginning of the Fatima visions, Pope John Paul II was shot by a Turkish national named Mehmet Ali Agca because he said the Pope refused to release the third prophecy of Fatima. Just 11 days earlier, an ex-Trappist monk had hijacked an Irish jetliner demanding the Vatican publish the third portion of the Fatima message. There was no response from the Vatican in either case. But the world had not heard the last of John Paul II or Lucia. On December 8, 1983, the Pope sent a letter composed with the help of Lucia to all bishops everywhere, inviting them to join him in consecrating the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary on March 25, 1984. In part of the prayer he said, "Most especially we entrust and consecrate to you those individuals and nations which need this help most, particularly Russia." Sister Lucia seemed finally to be satisfied. In fact, within 1 year after the consecration ceremony, Mikhail Gorbachev became the new Secretary General of the Russian Communist Party, and soon communist regimes began tumbling like building blocks. Finally, even the Berlin Wall came down. There was just one more aspect of the Fatima experience to be resolved: the secret of the third prophecy.
In June of the year 2000, the Vatican finally, after 83 years, on direct order of the Pope, published what before was its best-kept secret, the third part of the secret of Fatima. The key parts of the secret read as follows.
I write in obedience to you, my God, who command me to do so through His Excellency, the Bishop of Leiria, and through your most holy mother and mine. After the two parts, which I've already explained, at the left of Our Lady and a little above, we saw an angel with a flaming sword in his left hand flashing. It gave out flames that looked as though they would set the world on fire, but they died out in contact with the splendor that Our Lady radiated towards him from her right hand. Pointing to the earth with his right hand, the angel cried out in a loud voice, "Penance! Penance! Penance!" And we saw in an immense light that is God, something similar to how people appear in a mirror when they pass in front of it, a bishop dressed in white. We had the impression that it was the Holy Father. Other bishops, priests, men and women going up a steep mountain at the top of which there was a big cross of rough-hewn trunk, as of a cork tree with the bark. Having reached the top of the mountain, on his knees at the foot of the big cross, he was killed by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at him, and in the same way there died, one after another, the other bishops and priests.
The secret, which was so carefully guarded over so many years, was apparently a prophecy about the failed assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II in 1981.
A 20-year-old assassination attempt was the secret the Vatican had kept hidden for over 80 years. But at least the wondering was over, and the world could rest. Or could it? Even before the official publication of the prophecy, questions about its authenticity were being raised around the world. An article in the New York Times highlighted the disappointment of many who had waited decades for the disclosure. As is so often the case, when the Vatican lifts a veil to appease public opinion, it raises more questions. In this case, the questions ranged from misinterpretation to outright forgery.
When the third secret was revealed, we questioned the authenticity of it because of the information contained in what we knew. We hired Spokane Forensic Labs to examine it, and comparing Sister Lucy's writings and other letters, it did not compare with what was in the third secret released on June 26, 2000.
There are still those who believe the third message of Fatima was apocalyptic in nature and predicted chaos in the church. Obviously, the purported secret that was revealed in June of 2000 doesn't live up to that expectation. For now, what many hoped would be a closed matter remains a mystery.